All right, everybody, let's get this show started. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Virtual Science Cafe, brought to you by the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. I am your host for this evening. My name is Chris Smith, curator for the Daily Planet Theater at the museum in downtown Raleigh. So glad that you could be here tonight, ready for what I think is going to be a great program, because we have a fantastic guest on the show today, someone who I've had the pleasure of meeting in the past in my previous life at Duke University, and hearing this guest give presentations and talk about his research and the research that his lab group does at Duke University. And let me tell you, folks, this stuff is incredible. The insights that the world has gained from Dr. Brian Hare's research has been tremendous, especially if you like primates and if you like dogs, which have been two big. So if you like your pets and if you like your closest relatives in the animal kingdom, then Brian Hare and his research partners and co-author Vanessa Woods have brought all this stuff together to make our lives better. And it's such a pleasure to have him now with me here at the Museum of Natural Sciences for another show. Dr. Brian Hare is co-author of the book Survival of the Friendliest, Understanding Our Origins and Rediscovering Our Common Humanity, along with Vanessa Woods. Brian, welcome to the program.
Chris, thanks. We survived another hurricane.
We did. I was watching, I think all the leaves on my trees, they're now bare. They're all gone.
We're ready to rake now. We're ready to rake.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, being a natural history museum, we tell people don't rake, leave them. It's good for the wildlife.
That's true. Good mulch. That's right.
It's good. Leave your leaves. But that's neither here nor there. How have you been?
Fantastic, considering we have had a lot of excitement sharing all the work that we wrote about in our new book with lots of people all over. And, you know, I've virtually traveled to London and Chicago and all sorts of other places like that. And it's nice to be back here at home in good old North Carolina and with a museum.
It makes doing a book tour pretty easy, right?
Yeah, this is like my homecoming. This is my homecoming.
Well, everybody, Brian is core member of the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience. He's a professor in evolutionary anthropology and psychology and neuroscience at Duke University. He's received numerous awards. All that to say, I think you're going to enjoy the presentation. So sit back, strap yourselves in, and let's unlearn about survival of the fittest, maybe, and learn about survival of the friendliest. Brian, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you again for the invitation and for all y'all who are with us tonight. Again, it's a real pleasure. Chris is right. It is nice to go all these fancy places and not have jet lag. But it's even more fun to be back at the North Carolina Museum, where I have spent so many wonderful days with my kids and sometimes sneaking down there just myself because it's so fun to go. So I'm sorry we're not together in person. But at least we can have this wonderful opportunity via technology to hang out. And I want to share with you sort of a quick summary and hopefully 25 minutes or so of our new book. I hope I get you excited and that maybe you have a chance somehow to get a copy wherever books are sold. And I can answer some questions at the end about more about what the book's about. But I don't want to go any further without acknowledging my co-author, who I wish was with me to give this talk, but we have 2 kids, and I told Chris 2 puppies in our house right now. And we're raising 2 assistance dogs. And so they're only a few weeks, they're, what are they, 11 and 13 weeks old. So they have to have somebody watching them at all times. So she couldn't join me tonight, but if you enjoy our book, it will be despite me. She's a wonderful writer, and I can't thank her enough, obviously, for being my my number one teammate and making it happen. Okay, so why do we call our book Survival the Friendliest? What is this all about? You may know I study dogs. Chris said I study dogs and primates, which is true. The underlying assumption of all my work is that if you want to understand humans and human nature, or what it is to be human, I think we first have to understand what it is to be not human. And so I've spent a lot of time with a lot of different animals trying to get a better idea about ourselves from learning more about them. But when you take an evolutionary approach and think about human evolution, or any evolution, probably the first phrase that comes to most people's mind is this phrase that Chris already mentioned, survival of the fittest. It was actually not in the first 4 versions of Darwin's Origin of Species. It was only the 5th edition that he included it. And when he used it, and when it was originally quoted, survival of the fittest, that word fittest, has been terribly misconstrued in the public understanding to mean something that it doesn't really mean and didn't originally mean. So when a biologist says survival of the fittest, they just mean that it's an organism or a population that has something that allows them to survive and reproduce in some way that's advantageous over, say, another population or another individual. It doesn't really mean anything else than that. It just means you've got an advantage reproducing or surviving. And this phrase has been misconstrued to somehow mean that the alpha, the dominant, the biggest, the strongest is somehow more valuable, is somehow better, even in terms of thinking about different groups of animals or people. That if you're the fit group, then you're the one that deserves somehow to survive, or you're the one that's more valuable. That's not what this means when you say survival of the fittest. So our book, the title is sort of try to shake people a little bit and say, actually, even Darwin, when he was talking about survival of the fittest, he really thought that friendliness and cooperation and sympathy would be incredibly advantageous strategies. And we named the book Survival of the Friendliest because when you take a step back and you ask the question, and walking through the museum, you can do this too, look at some of the organisms there. But here's a small collection of examples. If you step back and say, hey, let's think about life's biggest successes. What was it that allowed some of the most success of different species that ever evolved? Well, what I would argue is survival of the friendliest is one of the most successful, if not the most successful strategy in life. We could walk through each of these little examples and I can tell you how a type of friendliness evolved that allowed for a new type of cooperation. And that friendliness and cooperation then allowed each of these organisms to outcompete or to spread all over the world and become extremely successful. So I'll give you a couple of examples off my slide here. Probably my favorite is the remora eel and this cleaner wrasse. So this is a wrasse, W-R-A-S-S-E, wrasse. Cleaner wrasse, these are the fish that clean the mouths of other fish. Well, it's more remarkable if you realize that these little tiny fish have evolved to not be afraid of predators and run away, or in this case, swim away, I should say, swim away from predators. They actually swim towards predators. And not only do they swim towards the fish that normally should eat a fish their size, they swim inside their mouths. So these fish have evolved to not swim away from fish that should eat them. They swim into them. And that's how they make a living. So they have a new type of friendliness where they are attracted to, they want to interact and have a social relationship with a predator. And as a result, they get food out of their mouths. The predator gets their mouth cleaned, and both individuals and both species profit. Another example where friendliness, and so that's an example of a new type of friendliness leading to cooperation and huge success. Another example is, think about Antarctica. There aren't any successful terrestrial vertebrates, so land living species with backbones, other than penguins. And how do penguins do it? How have they been able to live year-round in Antarctica? They've done it with a new type of friendliness. Now, think about the last time you saw some birds on the phone pole or up on the, the wire anywhere in your city or town, pigeons or any other flock of birds. They always have that space between them, right? They don't want to sit next to each other. They always have a little bit of space. Well, penguins violate that rule. They're birds. But actually what they do is when it gets really cold, they smash together and huddle. And because they can smash together and huddle and they're not afraid, and in fact, they're attracted to each other and want to be close and be friendly to each other, they can keep each other warm. And this type of cooperation allows them to survive in a place that no other species can survive year round. So survival of the friendliest, penguins, cleaner wrasse, and of course, there are even examples where humans are interacting with other species that are attracted to us and are friendly to us in a way that is slightly surprising, but because they're friendly and attracted to us, they end up winning really, really big in life's evolutionary game. So this is an example. I was in Australia. This is a rainbow lorikeet, a beautiful bird, and I was just trying to eat a muffin, and it flew on our table, and it ends up that these birds frequent this cafe we were at, and they like to eat the sugar that falls off the muffins. And of course, because they're so beautiful and they don't bother anybody, people love to let them get a meal. But what I want to argue for the rest of the time I have with you is that these are the example of survival of friendliest. Probably the most powerful examples of survival of the friendliest are dogs. I would offer dogs, our domesticated pet dogs, as exhibit A of the power of survival of the friendliest. And then I want to give you make an argument for bonobos, a case for bonobos, one of our two closest living relatives being a case of survival of the friendliest. And then hopefully, if I have time, we can talk a little bit about how we might be an example of survival of the friendliest, our own species. So I've been studying dogs for 20-something years, and it was all a big accident. It was because I was studying small children and chimpanzees and comparing their ability to communicate using gestures. And it ends up that right as kids begin learning to use gestures, they also start doing a whole bunch of other interesting social problem solving. And I'm going to let Anderson Cooper explain a little bit more what I mean and what we found with dogs compared to bonobos and chimpanzees and kids.
He's talking about what researchers call social inference, a capability humans, like Hare's son Luke, acquire around age 1. To demonstrate the concept, Hare hides a ball under one of these two cups.
Hey, look, guy, where is it? Can you get it? Can you get the ball?
Luke doesn't know which cup the ball is under.
Can you get it?
But when his father points, he makes an inference.
Hey, nice job.
You got it.
So what does that show you?
So when kids his age start understanding pointing, it's right when the foundations of what lead to language and culture start to develop.
It might look simple, but when Hare tried the same test with bonobos, great apes he studied for more than a decade, look what happened. Bonobos, our closest genetic relatives, can't do it.
You chose the wrong one.
But Hare discovered dogs can.
You ready? All right, I'm going to hide in one of these two places.
This 2-year-old Labrador named Sisu has no trouble understanding the meaning of pointing.
Now, she doesn't know for sure which place you put
That's
it.
right. There's no way she could know, and I'm just going to tell her where it is. Okay, Cece.
All right. So what we found that was surprising is that, and most scientists were excited but surprised to learn that these two species that look very similar and behave and think very similar usually, great apes, our closest primate relative, and little kids, they're not the most similar when it comes to cooperative communication. It ends up that dogs, if these little circles represent how skillful you are at understanding gestural communication and inferring the social intention that someone else has when they gesture to you, that it ends up that dogs and kids are most similar. Our close primate relatives, as brilliant as they are in so many other ways, they really don't get this. And why that raises this question: why in the world would dogs that are so distantly related to us be able to communicate in a way that is vital to start participating in culture and language if you're a young child? So we got really excited that if we could explain how this evolved in dogs, that maybe we could get some, make an inference about human evolution. All right, because normally you think about when you're going to explain human evolution, you'd look at primates. But here in this case, we think dogs might help us since they have this ability that other primates don't have and only humans have. Okay, so what did we do? Well, we had this really fortunate experience to work with some foxes that were experimentally domesticated. They were selected for friendliness. So there was an experimental line represented here, and they were selected by experimenters in Russia. And the friendliest foxes in each generation were bred together. And each year, year after year, and now the experiment's gone on for 55 years, they bred together the friendliest foxes again and again and again. And these foxes got friendlier and friendlier and friendlier. But more than that happened, because when they when they compared these foxes that they bred for friendliness to a control line that they bred randomly for how they interact with humans, there were all sorts of other things that changed when they measured and compared the two. Their behavior obviously changed, and I can tell you when you meet them, they really like people. They want to interact. The experimental line does. They wag their tails. They cry like little puppies. They really want to interact with you. But all sorts of other things happen. How they develop, their chemistry in their bodies, their body plan. They have higher rates of curly tails, and they have shorter faces. They have different colored coats sometimes. So lots of traits that we associate with domesticated animals appear in this line of foxes that were only selected for friendliness. So this led to the hypothesis that the initial stages of domestication are all due to selection for friendliness. It's survival of the friendliest. And we took this idea, this fox model, and we just asked the question, can we explain the evolution of dogs? And we've argued that you can, because we know from genomic comparisons that dogs actually began evolving 15 to 25,000 years ago. That's before the first crop was planted or the seed was sown. It means that wolves began evolving into dogs, a population of wolves, I should say, began evolving into dogs before humans had any agriculture. And it means that the humans who were interacting with wolves as they began to evolve into dogs were directly competing with them as they were hunting. So it seems unlikely that the normal story we tell of going and catching some dogs, some wool puppies and taming them and then somehow breeding them, that we humans decided, hey, let's make dogs. Wouldn't that be fun? Instead, what we think is this fox model gives us an idea that actually natural selection played the same game that the experimental, the scientists did in the experiment with the foxes. The friendliest wolves that were attracted and could interact in a friendly way with humans were at an advantage. They mated together, they bred together, and all the same changes that we see in the foxes happen in dogs. And that's the initial stage of domestication, and it all happened through natural selection. No human intentionally did this. All right, and we think the same thing happened to bonobos, and we think that the same thing may have happened to our own species. And the idea is that you have more fitness, you have more reproductive success through friendliness. There are these we call them accidental byproducts, because selection didn't select for curly tails or being better at cooperative communication. That was one thing, I'm sorry, I failed to mention with the foxes, is I went and studied the foxes, and I found that the same abilities that we saw in the video with Anderson Cooper, actually, they have the same dog-like abilities that are not in chimpanzees and bonobos, and are not in the control foxes. So it seems like when you select for friendliness, you get all these changes that you didn't actually intend to cause if you're doing it intentionally, selecting them for friendliness. And that includes an increased ability to read gestures and cooperatively communicate with humans. So we think the same process has happened in nature through natural selection again and again and again. So you have fitness via friendliness, byproducts, and then an increase in cooperative communication, which in that video with Anderson Cooper, we started out I tried to tell you that if we could explain it in dogs, maybe we could look at humans, because humans have this unbelievable ability at 9 to 12 months. We think there's lots of species that may be self-domesticated. It's a type of survival of the friendliness. I think there's many types of survival of the friendliest, but this is one. And one of the species that I think is interesting to consider is the wrasse that we already talked about. But there's other species that are pretty familiar to people on the Zoom, which would be, this is a deer that was in my neighborhood. Deer are increasingly interacting and living quite successfully in urban and suburban areas. Coyotes as well. I know Roland Kays at the museum, who we've collaborated actually on some research, asking questions about are coyotes going through a similar process, are at the beginning of a process of becoming self-domesticated. Even termites and their story of evolution is one of survival of the friendliest and maybe a case of self-domestication. So it's pretty exciting to think about how a type of friendliness can give an organism a major evolutionary advantage, and it's friendliness that allows them to win. All right, so I want to, I think I've got, Chris, about 5 more minutes. Is that right? All right, so I got 5 more minutes. Great. And let me tell you about an experiment with bonobos where they exhibit a surprising type of friendliness. So bonobos are one of our 2 closest relatives. It's like having 2 first cousins. Everybody's familiar with chimpanzees usually. Bonobos, not as many people know about. If you had 2 first cousins, one's a girl, one's a boy, they're equally closely related to you, but they're different from each other. And that's exactly the way it is with bonobos and chimpanzees and humans and our relationship. They're like our first cousins. One's a girl, one's a boy. They're equally related to us because they're both our first cousin. They're just different from each other. So bonobos, we gave the chance to share some food. We let some bonobos into a room full of food, depicted here, and they had a choice. They could just eat all the food, or they could open one of these doors, left or right, and they could let in either a group mate, another bonobo from their own group, or they could open a door and let in a complete stranger. And what we found, which surprised us, because this is not the finding in humans, bonobos had a really strong preference to open the door for a stranger and share food with a stranger. So even more amazing was often what we found was that this bonobo would go and open the door for the bonobo that was strange to them. But this strange bonobo to this guy would then walk across and open the other door because they didn't know each other. And so it seems that bonobos really are attracted and friendly to strangers in a way that humans and chimpanzees are not. So both humans and chimpanzees have the potential to be very xenophobic or afraid of strangers. And it ends up that bonobos have evolved a new type of friendliness, which is they really enjoy interacting with new bonobos they don't know, and they do it in a really friendly way. So I'll show you a quick video of what this looks like. All right, you can see she comes in, opens the door, shares the food with her friend. She doesn't have to open the door. She can just eat all the food. But young Saki here, oh, it's fun. Young Saki here opens the door, shares the food, and we never saw any kind of fighting or anything like that. They just enjoy helping out somebody, especially somebody they'd never met before. Okay, I promised you that this would have something to do with our own species. And just to summarize the bonobo story, we actually think that bonobos have a new type of friendliness. They share in a way. They lack aggression the way that you see in chimpanzees. And we think that they are following this fox model of self-domestication where you select for friendliness and all these changes occur that weren't under selection, but happen accidentally in a way. We think bonobos and their evolution from a chimpanzee-like common ancestor followed the same pattern. And what I'm going to argue now is that it may have happened similarly in our own species. One of the most exciting, shocking things, if you're somebody into evolution, is that humans were not alone on this planet until the last 25 to 50,000 years ago. There's increasing evidence that 100,000 years ago, there were multiple species with big brains, culture, and some linguistic ability. And of course, we know that they all went extinct. So the normal explanations we have to explain where we come from and why we're different from animals don't really work when you look at it this way. Because usually if you ask somebody, well, how are we different from animals? You say, well, we have big brains, or we have language, we have culture. That's why we're so successful and different. Well, that doesn't work because there were 4 other species that had those same traits and they all went extinct. So if anything, those things predict extinction. So it must have been something else. And I think it was friendliness. And I think dogs and bonobos point to the answer. I think humans evolved with, and have, our species of human had success over the other species of humans because we have a new type of friendliness. And we're the friendliest species of human to evolve. And sorry for the NC State and the UNC people. I'm sorry. I would be happy to use a different picture from your school. But these are, the horrid Cameron crazies. But the point that this is supposed to depict is that humans do this crazy thing where we can immediately form friendships with people we've never met before. In this picture, you've got kids from all over the world, all over the country. They've never met before, and they instantly can bond because they have a group identity that they share. In this case, it's Cameron crazies and Duke fans. And because of that, humans can cooperate and solve a whole host of problems that other species can't. And I think that's the secret to our success. And I'm going to stop there because I can tell you more about exactly why I think that is. It's probably, it's right now it may feel especially counterintuitive to make the case that humans are the friendliest species in our genus to have evolved, or that we have any unique type of friendliness. But based on the questions you asked me, I can tell you a little bit more about the argument, and then I can also tell you how it helps us explain the paradox that we have this enormous capacity for friendliness, but we also have the potential for enormous cruelty. And I think the two things are actually tightly intertwined and related. All right, so I'll stop there.
All right, what a way to end it. Thanks, Brian. So let me remind everybody that you can drop questions for Brian in the chat box right there on YouTube. We've got that pulled up so that I can throw questions his way. But you know, I've heard about this Russian fox domestication experiment that goes on, and you said it's been going on for 55 years, and they just keep getting friendlier and friendlier. Is that what?
Yeah, they every year they breed the friendliest foxes together, and so I think it's a curved relationship. I think in the beginning they got a lot friendlier, and now incrementally they get a little bit friendlier every year. But yes, they're always breeding the friendliest together.
So in that case, if I'm just going to start at the beginning with it, if you've got a friendly fox that likes human interaction or wants to be friendly with its caretakers, how do the caretakers not influence the friendliness? Feeding and caretaking and holding and petting because they have, curled tails, and we like them.
And they are pretty adorable. You're right. That's a great question. So they are raised in pretty much identical conditions. So they experience humans the same way. Which basically is they don't interact with humans almost at all. And so then when you go and approach them, the control foxes move away. They don't want to be near you. And if you try to touch them, they may even try to bite you. And when you go and interact with the experimental foxes, they would do kind of the same test. They would stand in front of them and they would try to touch them. And if they're individuals that didn't run away, they would breed those. And eventually if they approached, if they were happy to see you, they would breed those, and on and on and on. And now they have this population of foxes that when you go see them, they just go bonkers if they see a human. They're so happy, but they keep the control and experimental line in an identical situation otherwise.
Gotcha. And that makes sense. I've just always seen pictures of the friendly foxes around. Yeah, that's what the news articles like to see, I guess. That's the word.
Yeah.
All right. Questions are rolling into the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and grab the first one here. Lynn writes, wait, aggressive people gain power, friendly people tend to be seen as weak. So is the friendliness both an advantage and a disadvantage?
That's a great question. It's a great question. So let me back out and think about bonobos and chimpanzees with you, and then we can move to humans. So chimpanzees, they're alpha males. They have a very strict dominance hierarchy. All adult males typically are dominant to all females. It's the normal sort of social structure that people in Western society think of. Bonobos violate all of that. And remember that chimpanzees and bonobos are genetically almost indistinguishable. They share 99% and more of their DNA with each other, but they couldn't be more different on their social structure. There has never been a social group of bonobos observed to have an alpha male. It's always a coalition of females, and even though the females are smaller than any one male, they work together, and they basically don't tolerate male aggression. So a lot of people often, when you hear that, you're like, oh, and there's no bonobo has ever killed another bonobo. There's all sorts of amazing things about bonobos as a result of the fact that males aren't in charge. So a lot of people then think, oh, well, if the two species ever met or it must be that bonobos are sort of the weaker of the two species, blah, blah, blah. Well, let me give you one of the most exciting new findings that's only about a year old. Field workers, some researchers at Harvard, some researchers at the Max Planck Institute and Kyoto University have published data from 2 different sites in the Congo Basin where bonobos live, on wild bonobos, and they were able to measure which male bonobo has the most offspring. And it ends up that the male bonobos that are friendliest to the females are the ones that are most successful and have all the babies. Okay, but that's interesting. But it's even more amazing because then they compared the most successful male bonobo that's so friendly to females to the most successful male chimpanzee that is the alpha dominant, da 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 da. And it ends up that the most successful male bonobo is much more successful than the most successful chimpanzee that's ever been measured. So basically, friendly males in the bonobo world have more offspring and are more successful by being friendly than the most despotic and dominant alpha male in the chimpanzee world. So definitely friendliness pays. The other thing is, think about dogs again as Exhibit A. There's hundreds of millions of dogs. Sadly, wolves are endangered everywhere they're found. So really, their attraction and friendliness towards us pays big. In terms of humans, think about the bonobos and the chimps again. The argument is that those two species have evolved to be different. And they evolved to be different in their social structure because of the food that was available and the ecology. And the idea is that bonobos were able to be the friendly way that they are because there was more predictable resources in the way that they were able to share them. So now if you think about humans, there are ecologies, there are cultures where being more chimp-like can pay big, but then there's also the potential to be more bonobo-like. And certainly our species, I think, outcompeted other humans because we are able to form friendships like that picture of the Cameron Crazies, and it allowed us to cooperate and learn from each other in a way that other species can't. Our technology advanced much faster as a result, and we outcompeted the other humans. So yes, being friendly pays off big.
Okay, I have a question then to follow up. How do we attribute, or how could we go about attributing the extinction of our relatives, our human relatives, to being not so friendly?
Yeah, so the idea is that if you were a Neanderthal, if you were Homo erectus, I mean, Homo erectus by any measure is an incredibly successful species. The first evidence of their appearance is 1.9 million years ago. People are now arguing that they may have still been around 100,000 years ago. So incredibly successful species. But over the time that the 1.5 million plus years they were on Earth, the technology they used almost advanced zero. They were using kind of the same technology based on the best evidence we have 1.9 million years ago that they used 100,000 years ago or 200,000 years ago. In the case of Neanderthals, the best evidence is that yes, they had impressive technology, but they had a very limited number of individuals that they could interact with in their life. And that means that they couldn't meet people with new innovations. And so if you don't have a lot of innovators together, you can't then innovate rapidly. And what happens when you all of a sudden have a change in your social system where you can have this Cameron crazy thing where, oh, I don't know who you are, I've never met you before, but you are in my group and we share an identity. I can learn from you. I can absorb your innovations, and we can have our technology explode and move much faster. So that's the argument, is that our species has this new type of friendliness. We can cooperate in new ways. Our culture explodes, and we leave the less friendly humans in the dust.
Thank you. All right. Next one here is, do you see any evolutionary advantages of friendlier bonobos over a little bit less friendly chimpanzees, or do chimps outcompete bonobos by more aggression?
Yes, that's a great, so that was one of the things I didn't have time to tell y'all, is that if you imagine a map of, oh, there's one right there on behind your desk there, Chris. So we don't have to imagine Africa. There it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you look at Africa there on Chris's screen, the Congo Basin is kind of in Central Africa in the middle, and the Congo River goes like a question mark through the middle of Africa, and it kind of cuts that tropical forest in half. There you go. And it ends up that bonobos live south of that river. Thank you, Chris. And chimpanzees live north of the river. And so it ends up that the two species don't interact. And that's why they evolved to be separate species, because they actually don't live in the same place. They're separated by that river. And that's why we think that these two social systems evolved. We think south of the Congo River, the ecology was richer. And because of that, females could form friendships, bond, and then they didn't put up with male aggression anymore, because they would help defend each other, even though they weren't related to each other. North of the Congo River, chimpanzee females couldn't spend time together because they have to forage. Things are harder there. And so then when big groups of chimpanzees get together, a male becomes aggressive. Nobody protects a female or her offspring. I'm not related to you. We're not friends. I'm not bonded. So, if you get beat up, that's your problem. So male aggression paid big dividends in that ecology, whereas south of the Congo River, it didn't, and you evolve with a totally different social system.
There you go. Interesting stuff. All right. The next question here, it looks like we're back on the foxes. Didn't they also breed aggressive foxes? I think you mentioned it briefly. You said they would breed the friendliest and the not friendly.
Yeah, they bred. It's often not mentioned, and they bred a control line. Or sorry, they kept a control line. They bred the friendly line, and they also bred a third line that was aggressive towards people. They started that selection a little bit later, and I never really mentioned them because I didn't personally work with them, and it wasn't really. They weren't critical to testing the ideas I had, but I can tell you that their increase in aggression is really due to they're more fearful. So the control foxes don't want to be near you, and they avoid you. They'll only try to bite you if you try to touch them. The aggressive foxes, if you even go in front of their enclosure, they already start snapping. If you try to open the door, they try to bite you. But it's all fear. They're scared, and so it is an interesting metaphor that their terrible aggression is really motivated by fear.
Interesting. All right. Are dogs as friendly to other dogs as they are to humans?
That's interesting. Yeah. So wolves are one of the species of mammals that will commit lethal aggression. That means they murder each other. And wolf packs that live, neighboring wolf packs, if they come into conflict, they will kill members of the neighboring group. In captivity, it's a challenge to maintain multiple groups of wolves because of their potential for lethal aggression. Dogs in populations that are free ranging and are not, so think about dingoes in Australia or free ranging dogs in developing countries, for instance, say street dogs in India, etc. Those dogs do not typically kill one another. It's very, very unusual. Usually territorial disputes are handled through barking and chasing, but it's very unusual that an inner group or two groups fighting each other, someone gets killed. Whereas with wolves, it's much more frequent.
All right. Irene Nazario says, "Hi, Brian."
Oh, hi.
And and asks, while bonobos don't really exhibit xenophobic tendencies and chimpanzees do, is this some kind of evolutionary trait for protection?
Ah, interesting. Well, okay. So since you asked the question, it's even more fun than that because meaning the first part, one species is xenophobic, one is xenophilic. Chimpanzees have the capacity to be xenophilic. Juvenile females in particular will leave their natal group and join a new group. To do that, you have to be attracted. You have to get over your fear of a strange group and want to move to a new group. So there is a moment in especially female chimpanzees' lives where they are xenophilic. They're actually attracted to other members. And one of the ideas about how, when you select for friendliness, what do you do to an organism? One of the main ideas is you're actually changing how they develop. There's some beautiful examples in nature outside of primates, like salamanders that North Carolina is so famous for, a lot of species of salamanders evolve by not, like, I don't know, now we're going to have two tails instead of one tail or whatever. They change and adapt to their environment just by developing in a different way. So they stay in a more juvenile stage, say how they breathe, they stay that way for their whole life. Instead of maturing out of, say, a tadpole stage, they kind of stay as a tadpole their whole life. Let's put it that way. And one of the arguments is that's what happens to bonobos, is that bonobos kind of keep that xenophilia that juvenile female chimpanzees have, but they keep it for their whole life. They just never lose it. They never grow up. They're like the Peter Pan of the Pan genus. It is a really interesting phenomenon. And you asked about protection. I'm sorry to droll on, but you asked, is it something about protection? Yes, it is. In chimpanzees, if you're talking about xenophobia, chimpanzees respond to another neighboring group in threatening ways if they outnumber their neighboring group. If they don't outnumber their neighboring group, they tend to run away. And that's because they are afraid they'll be injured or killed. And obviously they are trying to intimidate their neighbor so that they don't come in and attack them. I mean, it's all very familiar. Sounds all very human-like. Bonobos, on the other hand, how could xenophilia be related to protection? I actually think you're onto something. I think that explains their bonobo xenophilia too. But it's that females, when they bond and they're able to form coalitions against larger males, and they are able to stop male aggression as a result. What motivates, in my experience, and we've written a paper about it, what motivates female aggression towards males is the need to protect infants. So if an infant is in danger, and or actually it doesn't even have to be in danger, that's one of the sad things. If an infant says it's scared, let's put it that way, and gives an alarm call, and there's some poor male, some big male nearby, I mean, he's toast. I mean, there's going to be a whole group of females that are going to chase him around because he scared that baby. And so the interesting thing is the females that form this coalition, they're not related, and they're not related to the baby. They're not related to each other. But they do not tolerate males threatening babies. And so I think as a result, bonobos are unusual in the primate world because there's never been an observed case of infanticide in bonobos. No bonobo baby has ever been killed by another bonobo. Chimpanzee infanticide is quite common. Chimpanzees will, relative to bonobos, they will attack and kill and injure, fatally wound, or even sadly sometimes eat the babies in other groups, and sometimes, rarely, even within their own group.
I was going to say those behaviors are well documented in chimpanzees, and but there's a good question here. Lynn wants to know about lemurs.
Yeah, so
which is interesting, right? We know that lemurs live in these female-dominant social groups.
Yeah. So that's Lynn. It's a wonderful question because I love lemurs too. I've had the pleasure of working at the Duke Lemur Center. Lemurs were actually really helpful for me to think about bonobos because there's a big debate in the bonobo literature. There was a lot of emotion and energy because people were claiming that bonobos are female dominated because they form these coalitions against males. They're not male dominated, clearly, so they must be female dominated. But if you reflect on lemurs and even hyenas, and you start to realize that actually that's not what's going on in bonobos, because lemurs are female dominated. And in the case of the species that are really strictly female dominated, like ringtail lemurs, the ones that have the rings on their tails, the female lemurs are actually bigger in size than the males, and the females are actually dominant to all the males. So it's almost as if the female lemurs have become male-like. In bonobos, that's not what happened. The females are not larger. The females are not more aggressive than chimpanzee females. It's that bonobo males have actually become juvenilized. They've become more friendly relative to male chimpanzees. And female bonobos, really, if anything, have changed to form these coalitions, but it's not that they've become masculinized. They're not more male in their behavior.
There you go, Lynn. All right. The next question here, wouldn't a group of early humans, bonobos, etc., who are more likely to welcome strangers also be more likely to spread communicable diseases which would threaten survival?
Yes, definitely. There are costs associated with any social strategy. So if you're alpha and you're trying to be an alpha male, there's wonderful work by Jenny Tung and Susan Alberts in my own department and at Duke studying wild baboons, showing that individual baboon males who become that big alpha and are in charge or whatever, that they pay a big cost, an energetic cost. They also pay a cost to their immune system. And it ends up that they age more rapidly. And of course, they're being targeted with a lot of aggression. So being the big, tough alpha male has huge costs associated with it. And your question about communicable diseases, though, is similar, is that, yes, now you're interacting with more individuals, and now you can be exposed potentially to more diseases. So it has to be that the advantage of being friendly is so big that it actually outweighs any of these costs. And that's what I would suggest happened in the case of bonobos and humans. Whereas I actually think bonobos probably evolved from a more chimp-like ancestor that was chimp-like in its aggression. I think what happened was once females were able to bond, the costs of male aggression were too high and relative to the benefit that you could get, because females wouldn't let you dominate. So if you're running around getting injured and hurt trying to be alpha and it doesn't pay off in terms of your ability to reproduce, all it is cost. So now the friendly males, the ones who are least aggressive, are the ones that have a huge advantage, and they do better reproductively. So it's survival of friendliest.
You think that's why mean people stick out in our minds? we remember them. We're like, they're not playing by the evolutionary rule book here that we are.
Well, I mean, there's an interesting argument there. Okay, so I hate to geek out about your comment, your joke there, but
no, let's go.
There is an argument that we normally, when we think about human societies and our own social system, what is a human social system? What is the natural state of humans or whatever? And of course, there is no real answer to that question, but because there's such potential for flexibility and diversity in human social structures. But it is not the case that we should assume that hierarchy is the natural state for humans, because before there was agriculture, which our species has existed 300,000 years, agriculture has existed 5 to 10, depending on, there were populations that had agriculture 10,000 years ago, but most people didn't have agriculture until maybe 5,000 years ago. So until 5 to 10,000 years ago, everybody was living as a hunter-gatherer. Well, cross-culturally, when people have studied foraging populations without agriculture, there is no chief. There is nobody who's in charge. And so it goes back to your point about not liking mean people. One of the arguments is that the social system in humans was a little bit like bonobos, that we had a reverse dominance hierarchy, that people would work together. And if there was somebody who was overly aggressive or mean or, antisocial, that people would form a coalition against that individual and, correct the, basically their attempt to be a despot. And so basically it was more in small groups, humans and our psychology has evolved to be more egalitarian. It's only when you have agriculture and people living in groups bigger than 150 that all of a sudden you can't organize unless there's some kind of hierarchy.
All right. See, that was brilliant. That was great. Okay, there's just a few more here. I think we can get through them in the time we've got left. So we've got a viewer who says, in ethnology, seems to be some evidence that less friendly societies may have erased friendlier ones. Could it be that by cultural evolution / agriculture, we turned our evolution towards more aggression?
That's a great question. And so part of what I left off was, yes, we are the friendliest human species that evolved, but there's this paradox that we see our potential for cruelty everywhere. So how do you square those two things? The argument we make in the book, and I hope you'll go check it out because we really spend a lot of time on this and potential solutions for a friendlier future. It is that the same psychology that allows for this new type of friendliness I'm talking about is the same psychology that sets up the potential for human cruelty. And so as humans started to be more successful expanding their groups and organizing in larger groups and being more successful at innovating and having technology, we have the psychological capacity to see others as not other humans as not being human, not fully human. And when that occurs, it allows us to morally exclude those people. And that's when you get the most horrific outcomes between different groups interacting. So we talk in great detail about what that is, where it comes from, and what to do about
it. Everybody go get the book.
it.
All right. Let's see. There's one more here for you. Is the opposite of being friendly being aggressive, or arguably being introverted? This user is wondering how introversion fits into your idea.
I like that. Yeah, no, I don't think being introverted means you're not friendly. I would define friendly as replacing fear with attraction. So I could see where, introversion could be viewed as a type of fear. But especially in the modern world, you can be really introverted, but still have lots of rich types of social interactions and deep bonds. And what I really think is the solution to some of the worst problems we face are friendships across different groups, groups that may actually feel threatened by one another, friendships that are really true, deep, meaningful friendships across those groups tend to be bridges and basically dampen or even immunize against the worst in human nature. And I think an introverted person can do that, have a deep, meaningful friendship as well as anybody. I certainly don't think, often there's some data from young kids in particular that young infants who are a little bit more introverted, they tend to have more empathy. They are more reactive to others' suffering. So yeah, I think those would all encourage cooperation and pro-sociality.
There you have it. You can go be friendly, everybody. Do you think that there's a limit to surviving by friendliness? When I look at let's take a global perspective, humans as a species, there are now approaching 8 billion of us on the planet. So we're obviously extraordinarily successful. And now nearly all 8 billion of us are connected through technology in one way or another.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious how that continues to play out on a planetary scale.
Yeah, I mean, in the book, we talk about solutions to that exact problem. And I think what the argument we make in the book is we've got to get it right about diagnosing what the actual causal problem is. And I think the causal problem for when we have hard conflicts is a deeply rooted part of our psychology that has been characterized, that we understand. And now that we kind of understand how this same mechanism can either lead to really good outcomes of cooperation, or it can lead to horrific cruelty and, of the unspeakable, unthinkable kind. The question is, how do we organize ourselves, and how do we create cultures and ecologies where you get friendlier people in the friendlier future, have our better angels express themselves? And I think there actually, believe it or not, there are actionable solutions that are policy ready, and we explore them in the book. And I think that since you're right by the Capitol and we're here with an election happening as we speak, you may or may not be surprised. One of the big things we land on is the importance of liberal democracy, because it's really the only large-scale way that people have figured out how to organize themselves, where when there's a minority or a majority, you can have compromise without massive conflict potentially, if it's done right. So I think there's real solutions, and I think there's reason for a lot of hope.
And on that note, Brian, thank you so much. Excellent stuff as always.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right, everybody. I'll remind you, I put the link for you to purchase the book, Survival of the Friendliest, in the chat. It's right there. Look for Science Chris to have posted the link. And when you get your copy from the museum store, you can pick it up. If you're close to Raleigh, you can pick it up at the museum, or you can have it shipped to you. And Brian and co-author Vanessa signed specially designed book plates. So you get it from the museum store, you can get your copy signed by the authors. Take advantage of that. The link, again, I think it's on that side, in the chat. It may be on that side. So make sure you do that. Oh, what else do you want to do? You want to go ahead and subscribe to the museum's YouTube channel and click the bell to get notified. Because you do that, you'll be ready next Thursday night when we bring you the next Virtual Science Cafe live. We'll be talking with author Hal Herzog, and we'll be talking about his book, Some We Love, Some We Hate, Some We Eat. I think Hal, he may have even tuned in this one, because it's sort of, we got one side of human-animal relationship with Brian. We're going to get the other side of it next week. So don't miss next Thursday night. And if you follow the museum on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, we're at Natural Sciences on all three. You can get updated about all of the virtual programs that are happening live, on demand, and you can see even more great stuff that's coming up. Naturalsciences.org is the museum website, and that's where you can get information about how to come and visit us, because the museum has thrown its doors open Tuesday through Sunday from 10 to 4. You just need to go online to get a free timed ticket in order to come and visit us. Do that. Read up on how to visit the museum safely. We've done our best to make it safe for everybody to come and see us once again. And I think that's all the notes that I had for the end. So everybody, take care, stay safe, and be friendly. And good night.
Thank y'all.